This is the Cameron Journal Podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal Podcast. Hello, everyone. Let's change cameras. That's much better. Oh my goodness. Today, I have not had it together, folks. I had a bunch of errands to run today. I have been doing a bunch of stuff for grad school. Let's move this around a little bit. That's much better. And so, I didn't even have time to put my hair up. I was just taking a little bit of a nap before we get started today because it's been a long week. So, as I kind of told everybody, I have I think I told everybody I have been teaching this class for my teaching practicum for grad school over the last couple weeks. We're halfway through the class so far, and so we're kind of in the back half of it all, and teaching is even, I'm just doing a workshop for 20 hours. It is so much work to get prepared for it. And especially, I've kind of been building this workshop as I've been going along. Like each week, I've been doing lesson planning, and I have been, let's move the microphone a little bit closer. I've been doing lesson planning and making the slide presentations and working with activities and students, and I've been reading books about teaching and all this type of thing, and so it's just like so much. And yeah, so it's been a huge commitment. I On the bright side though, I am kind of making content for future endeavors, which is really awesome. So that's great. But um I it's been really taxing on top of kind of being already burnt out. On the bright side though, there's a lot of great new content coming up over the next couple days. I've been building content for November. I'm taking a little trip the week of November 15th, so there's not going to be a weekly news show that week. I'll uh put that in the programming notes. We'll also not do one the week of Thanksgiving. But there'll be programming notes on social media for that to let everybody know. But yeah, I'm kind of taking a little vacation, kind of an end of semester break from it all. So I'm trying to get everything content wise in place. All the really fun videos I wanted to share with you are already scheduled. So we have videos about 2 days a week till the end of the year. So I'm just working on kind of the written content. I've been sitting on a lot of stuff from the summer break that I'm trying to get out. So I just did a new best advice on like how to live well on less, with some kind of practical tips on how I've saved money as the years have gone by. Today, Big Trouble in Mental Healthville came out, which is about my autism journey. Um, and so just been a lot. It's been a lot of heavy content, but it's also been a lot of stuff that I've been sitting on. So I've just kind of been um going through a bunch of content that I've just been sitting on and just trying to put it all out into the world before the end of the year so we can kind of start 2022 on you know, a fresh kind of foot. Because I took off, 4 months in the middle of this year. So, um, I don't know when my next long break is going to be. Longtime readers will know I am notorious for taking long breaks from time to time just to recharge and get stuff done and all this type of thing. So I'm gonna take a little break into Thanksgiving. I do always take the last 2 weeks of December off, so there'll be a programming note for that as well. So I don't know what my next long break is gonna be, but right now we have lots of content, so we're just moving forward with all of that, building all of that together. So definitely keep an eye at CameronJournal.com for all of that. This week I have been busy with teaching and putting my teaching packet together and dealing with various and sundry administrative stuff and all this type of thing. I really have not been super checked in to the news because I've been busy kind of writing on other things, and talking about other things like mental health and some issues with masculinity and all this type of thing. However, this week in the Into the Abiscuit podcast with DJ Lewis, who's been on the show, and Drew Morgan, we have a book club that's a kind of attached to that podcast. And we have been reading a book called Cultish. And it's this whole book about cults ranging from like fitness cults to, the cults you kind of think of that are more religious based, to even like MLM scams and like the language and the psychology and everything that they like use to like get people and keep people and all this type of thing. And considering I grew up evangelical, it's been a fascinating journey to like understand what I went through as a kid from an outside perspective, and how like other people experience the other people experience you when you're involved in that type of world, and also like how people get out, how it changes lives, oftentimes not necessarily for the better. Um so it's an interesting sort of thing. One of the things that we've kind of been talking about and discussing that I thought was interesting was the whole thing around people looking for tribe and community. And this kind of gets into the news because I'm sure you're familiar with the fact like the country has never been more divided than it is right now. And we still have an incredibly contentious um lie campaign and misinformation, disinformation, lying campaign coming from Trump about the veracity of the 2020 election. Oh, excuse me. I'm tired. I told you guys I'm tired. It's Friday. I'm exhausted. Um, I stifled that yawn 4 times before it just snuck out. Um, and it's like having watched last week I talked about how I watched 4 hours at the Capitol, this great documentary on Apple, oh no, on HBO Max. And and how, so much of QAnon and Trump and all this type of thing lines right up with what she's talking about in Cultish. But the most important thing was people's feeling of needing somewhere to belong. And I've been saying this for a while. I said it in my nonfiction book, What the Hell is Going On, that it is really. I don't think people understand how out of place and unmoored people feel given what has happened in our society over the last 20 years, but particularly the last 10 years, and how people are looking for somewhere to belong. People are looking, and this is both sides of the aisle, this isn't just a Republican problem. People are looking for somewhere to belong. They're looking for where their people are. And fundamentally, humans are hierarchical primates, like bonobos and orangutans. And so we are and because of that, we're also tribal. And we're always kind of looking for where do we belong, where do we go, where do we fit in the social order, all this type of thing. And most importantly, do we believe in that social order? And one of the things that's been happening over the last 10 years in particular is the social order has been changing. People who used to be on the bottom have been moving up. People that have been on the top may feel not in material terms, but may feel like they're moving down. There's been a huge shakeup in the social order. And so people are looking for a place that reinforces their ideas of how the social order should be. And this is where the Republican Party is particularly guilty because they've been trafficking in the whole idea of quote unquote family values for the last 30, 40 years. They've also been trafficking in the idea of, traditional values and all this type of thing. And really, traditional values is really just a byword for remember when the world was that white people were on top, they got the first of everything, and everybody else was just kind of below, beneath, and ignored? Wouldn't that be nice to go back to that? And there's 45% of the country that's kind of like, yeah, sign us up, let's do it. Where do we start? And that's the energy that Trump kind of dialed into. And so reading this book was a real education in how cults get started, how some of the most unlikely but incredibly charismatic people can become cult leaders. And I think most importantly, how and why people get involved in that type of thing to make sure that they feel like they have some place to belong. They feel like somebody somebody knows them, understands them, gets them, and that they can, talk with somebody without having to explain every single thing about themselves, or they don't necessarily feel the need to explain why they're doing what they're doing or why they believe what they believe. The other person just sort of knows. And one of the things I mentioned in the course of our discussion about cultish, and this is certainly true of other cults, is that imagine gathering in a room with, thousands of other people who look like you and think like you, and you all have the same opinions, and you all are looking at the world in the same way, and you're cheering for somebody who's validating every single one of those feelings, and you are you all come to these shared beliefs. You can't buy that type of social validation. You can't. You just can't. It is indelible in its explanation and invaluable in the way that it makes people feel. And that is something that you have to understand at a deep level about Trump supporters and the whole Trump movement. Especially as the movement starts to move away from Trump. One of the things that if you follow some right-wing accounts or follow some Trump supporters, all this type of thing, you started to see is that now they're using that whole thing of it's not about the man, it's about the movement. And there's kind of this whole idea of, well, Trump may not be running again, or Trump may not be around in 2024, or whatever have you, but let's keep this movement going. And that has implications because I think a lot of people on the left think, oh, we've defeated Trump, therefore, that's over, we can move on, all this type of thing. And that literally couldn't be farther from the truth. The reality is that although Trump may not run again, and although, Trump himself may be gone, the people that believe those things are going to splinter off into their own tribes and groups backing their own candidates. Some people will run for office. Some already have. Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Josh Hawley, all this type of thing. And so all of a sudden now, it's not just one fire you're worried about. It's dozens all over the country. And that's our future. And I think that's something where, combined with the Republican Party's intractability on basic democracy and their desire to be able to get and maintain power regardless of how they have to do it, including voting suppression, changing voting laws, all this type of thing, suddenly you're going to have this just, groundswell of people who are not the majority, but who hold an outsized amount of power, and they feel like their movement is going to kind of get them back on top and address some of the complaints. We can talk about their validity. Um, to stop, to kind of stop and reverse what has been going on. So you kind of have these two forces coming together. On the one hand, you have Trump supporters kind of like moving away from Trump and wanting to be a movement and tribe of their own. And you have the Republican Party who's trying to hang on to power as best they can by, changing, voting laws and all this type of thing. And all of a sudden, these two things are colliding together. And that's where, when I wrote my article a couple months ago, why Republicans will always win and maintain power, that wasn't out of a happiness of what the Republican Party is doing. It was a wake-up call to people to let them know, hey, this is a thing. Like, guess what? Like, this is a huge problem. And the only way to not make it so the Republicans can essentially rule as a minority from 2024 onward is to get damn busy. And that includes, at a national level, at a federal level, addressing voting rights issues, which I'm very hopeful Congress will take on once they wrap up infrastructure and the Build Back Better. Speaking of that, President Biden is in Europe this week doing a tour. He was in Rome today visiting with Pope Francis, which I'm sure for him was a very holy moment, as we know Joe Biden is devoutly Catholic. So his opportunity to meet with the head of the Holy See is got to be a significant moment for him. It was reported they had a meeting, although no pictures, no cameras until afterwards. The Biden folks were hoping to get a deal on Build Back Better with Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema before he left for Europe, but they didn't quite get that over the line. However, there is kind of yesterday people were kind of being like, yes, we finally have a deal, we've come together on something, we had to cut a bunch of stuff out, but we're here, we've got it, let's move forward, let's go. And then this morning it kind of came out that, well, maybe the deal's not so done. So we were kind of cheering yesterday, and then today we're kind of like, maybe not. Maybe not so much. So, regardless of kind of whatever comes of this whole thing, the reality is that Joe Biden is going to Europe without these pieces of legislation having been voted on and passed before he departed, which is definitely difficult. And it's kind of added to the difficulty because on this trip, he's also going to the International Summit on Climate Change, COP26, which is in Glasgow this year. It's a continuation of a series of climate meetings that have been held every so often, beginning with Kyoto in 1997, all the way through to today. And although there is climate investing in the trimmed down spending bill, which has gone from 3.5 trillion to a modest 1.75, the Joe Biden can't go into the climate summit saying, here's the investments we're doing into climate change, it's already passed. Unfortunately, he's going to have to go into this meeting saying, here's what we're hoping to get passed next week. So the budget has to go through the House first, because bills spending money have to originate in the House. And then if Manchin and Sinema hold, it will then move to the Senate, where you're going to end up with 50 Republican votes against, 50 Democrat votes for. Vice President Kamala Harris will break the tie. And then it will be off to Joe Biden for a signature. That's what they're hoping for. The other half of this is the infrastructure bill. which has been passed by the Senate but needs to be passed in the House. So Biden is also trying to get the House to go along with the Senate's existing infrastructure deal, so that so that they can get both of these pieces of legislation booked, passed, done, and moving forward. As I said, they were trying to get this done before Biden's week-long trip to Europe, and that was unfortunately not what they were able to do. Biden did show up at a 9 a.m. Senate caucus meeting on yesterday, actually, just before he left, to talk with members of the House about both of these pieces of legislation. One of the things I think has been interesting is how incredibly persistent he has been at a personal level on all of this, and how much a part of the process he has been at a personal level. He hasn't been using surrogates as much as, Obama would have, or Bill Clinton would have, or other things like that. I think it's interesting how he's been personally involved in this whole thing. So the climate deal conference should be a bit interesting. Vladimir Putin is not going to be in attendance at the climate meeting. Russia notoriously is not doing anything to solve or stop climate change. So I guess he just figured he could skip that one. Why go to pretend to care about climate change when you could just not bother going? Interestingly enough, Xi Jinping of China is also not going to be at the climate meeting personally. He's going to Zoom in. Xi Jinping has not been doing any travel as of about the last year or so. He's been sticking close to his own shores. There was a Communist Party CCP meeting in Beijing a couple months ago, and that was one of the few times he had even been in public. But as far as international travel, the Chinese leader has been staying pretty close to home. So, with the climate deal, it's difficult to get movement on climate change without China. That's even true for broader Asia, less Japan, but certainly true for China, especially as China continues to build coal-fired power plants, continues to buy liquid natural gas and coal from throughout their local region and throughout the world, all this sort of thing. China's absence, I don't think is a symbol that China doesn't take climate change seriously, but I think it's a symbol that when it comes to working on the climate or taking their national economic interests seriously, their national economic interests are going to win every single time. And ironically, it has been national interest intractability on the side of all nations that has made it difficult to have very much meaningful movement on climate change in the past 25 years. Indeed, if we had taken climate change much more seriously 25 years ago, we would be in a very different situation than we are today. Now we're in the situation where if we don't start actionably doing something by the end of this decade, it's really not going to matter, because the worst effects of climate change are going to be baked in. And it's kind of hard to not see that, given, the news stories that have come out, weather-wise. For instance, there's a news story from today about how there's a storm that's going to be bearing down on the East Coast that's going to cause terrible coastal flooding in parts of DC and Baltimore, which is kind of a harbinger of what's to come with climate change. Everyone who read my book, What the Hell is Going On, knows that I've written a whole very popular essay about my issues with climate change research. The research about climate change is much more circumspect than the popular media narratives or the social narratives about climate change. I do not think things are as dire as the headlines would have you believe. However, it is a simple fact of the matter that the weather is changing, our climate is changing. Personally speaking, based upon the data, I think our climate is reverting to a warmer mean temperature that is more familiar to the planet. We know the Earth has been much, much warmer in the past. Sea levels have been far, far higher. We know there was a small ice age in the 1300s, of which, we're still exiting because everything to do with climate takes place over hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands of years. And when you start looking at UN reports and IPCC reports and all this type of thing, you find that the research there is a lot more circumspect than kind of the popular narrative of, oh, the planet is burning down and we're not going to have a planet in 50 years and all this type of thing. Well, they said that in the 70s. It's been 50 years and here we are. So, rather than trafficking in hyperbole, we need to traffic in precise accuracy. And in the book, I outline what my issues with climate change are. But the reality of it is, we do need to move away from fossil fuels. I don't think that is a bad idea. I don't care about the climate as much as I care about public health. And the reality is, from a public health perspective, moving away from fossil fuels, great idea. All this sort of thing. I think the difficulty is that it's going to be difficult to maintain our industrialized lifestyles in a more sustainable way. And I think people are beginning to wake up to that idea. And I think that's something people are going to be very uncomfortable with. But it's a conversation that's certainly worthy of being had. But as I said, the climate change conference is going on. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of that conference, considering Britain has committed to being net zero by 2050. Many other nations have committed to being net zero by 2050. And there are even those who are promising significant climate emission reductions by the end of the decade, which is in only 9.25 years. So that's going on in the background. Today, President Biden met with Francis Macron in Rome, which had to have been an awkward meeting considering France is still unhappy about the AUKUS submarine deal, where the U.S. swooped in and cheated the French out of a submarine deal and sold the Aussies nuclear submarines instead of buying the diesel-electric French submarines, and basically didn't tell France what they were going to do. There were multiple reports at the time of how and why that happened, including the fact that the French submarines just weren't going to have the capabilities the Australians were looking for, and were not going to be useful in defending Australia against China. There are people in Australia who are angry about the fact Australia is buying nuclear submarines. Some people said, submarine deals of any variety were always going to be a financial boondoggle, whether they were French or American. It was just going to cost way too much money, and why are we doing it? So, like I said, that was bound to be an awkward meeting. During the meeting, Biden reportedly said that the U.S. was clumsy in handling the AUKUS submarine deal. So, a couple other news stories that I'm keeping an eye on for you this week. We are also kind of looking at in terms of COVID, the pandemic is easing over the last couple months, which is great. The FDA approved kids from age 5 to 12 to get the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. So parents will be able to get their kids vaccinated in a timely manner. I have been following some stories about the vaccine causing myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart, in children and others. There seems to be a small number, not significant, but small number of people who get myocarditis from the vaccine. So it's interesting to kind of look at that and see, where things are going, and what's kind of happening with the vaccines long term, which I think is interesting. It's something to know. It's something to keep an eye on. It's something to be mindful of and to do a risk assessment. All vaccines, even the ones that were tested over longer periods of time and all this type of thing do indeed have some risks. But those risks are certainly better than getting than getting COVID. Ironically enough, the COVID-19 has caused a terrible sort of backup in the health of Americans. And now hospitals are busy not with COVID, but with just un untreated health issues that people have been wary to treat over the last year and a half, almost 2 years, and that is going to burden the healthcare system for quite some time. And I was kind of waiting for that to happen. I knew that as people, didn't go to the doctor and delayed operations and all this type of thing, that backup of health problems was eventually going to come due, and apparently it now has. So I think that's kind of interesting on the pandemic front. Obviously, everybody has been talking about Google, not Google, Facebook, and their new name and rebrand as Meta. That's a take off of Zuckerberg's new VR project called the Metaverse. And he basically wants to start building these virtual environments where people can hang out, have business meetings, all this type of thing using virtual avatars rather than meeting in person. And given all that's happened with the Facebook papers and the congressional testimony about Facebook prioritizing profits over public safety or safety at all, a rebrand now seems a bit awkward. For the one, it seems as if Facebook is just kind of ignoring the problem to be kind of like, well, yeah, you don't like us, but we're already building other, things. We're doing other products and projects. Who cares? That honestly is so emblematic of just the way the tech industry deals with issues. Like, the tech industry doesn't care one iota about the public policy implications of the things that they do. That's just the reality of it. They literally don't care. And this attitude of being like, well, we're already on to things and whatnot with Oculus VR and all this type of thing that you don't understand and therefore we don't care. I'm not surprised at all that that's exactly what's happening, because that's what tech does. When there's a public policy problem with one of their products, as long as the money's still flowing in, they just simply move on. They don't wait around to try to work with people to figure out how to, mitigate these issues, or how to, figure out how to mitigate the worst effects and do the least harm to society. They just simply move on. People in tech are not really concerned about their greater effect on society. They are, I think there's three problems. One, they don't understand the problems that they're causing. Two, because they don't understand them, they don't care. And three, they figure that if they keep inventing new stuff people will use, nobody is going to necessarily stop them or hold them accountable. And as I've said before, and it bears repeating, no time in human history has such a small group of people controlled the lives of so many. I mean, when you have someone like Mark Zuckerberg, who essentially has control over the perceived reality of 3 billion people, that is the kind of power that monarchs have never had. Emperors of antiquity did not have. And no one elected him. No one asked anyone. He never applied for anything, and he was never qualified, because the reality is Mark Zuckerberg is an incredibly wealthy college dropout. And the fact that Facebook also owns Instagram and WhatsApp and is become such a huge part of our lives gives him a certain air of invincibility. that most people don't have. I mean, especially given the way things are going with the big oil companies right now, who are really about to get under the congressional eye. Big oil wishes they had that kind of power. Other companies wishes they kind of had that power. And yet, a punk kid from Harvard who, just wanted to, meet girls faster and rate them on their hotness and made a website to do so and has now basically become the biggest force in human history. I mean, if you'd told us in the heady days of 2007, hey, one day Facebook is basically going to run the world, it's going to cause coups, rig a presidential election, and have wide ranging social affect, we would have all laughed in your face. And yet here we are today. That's exactly what's going on. So it's it's a very odd kind of state that we find ourselves in. But like I said, obviously, Facebook's whole rebrand as Meta definitely has an odd timing, odd thing with it, given what has happened over the past couple weeks. Former Governor Andrew Cuomo has a new charge of um, a misdemeanor charge of forcible touching due to his inappropriate actions towards staff in his campaign and during his time in office. So that is, it looks like resignation for him is not enough. There is going to be some sort of criminal prosecution. I doubt he'll see jail time, but um, it's still, something to think about and something to kind of be mindful of. In another day and time, Cuomo would have never even resigned, and now not only do we get a resignation, but we're getting possible criminal prosecution. That is, how times do change. So that's kind of the major headlines this week. There was kind of a couple other small things, I think, travel wise. There was some business stuff happening. It's earnings week. This week we're getting Q3 earnings from everybody, and earnings look healthy, markets look healthy, all that type of thing. If you want more business news and stuff on that, head over to my Substack, CameronJournal.substack.com, where I talk about, kind of business focused stuff, things like that. The situation with Alec Baldwin accidentally shooting the cinematographer and the director on the shoot of his low budget action movie is still ongoing. No word on criminal charges yet, but every story that comes out, it just seems to be worse. Like, every story that comes out, it's always bad. Like, oh, they weren't managing the weapons properly. Oh, like, there was problems before. No one knows where the bullets came from. Like, it's just like every single time. The farther you get into it, the worse it gets. So, um, that story is still kind of capturing the public imagination for obvious reasons. It's pretty rare to find someone, to hear of someone getting shot on a movie and they actually end up dying or getting injured or whatever have you. Striketober is still continuing, although the IATSE, the Film Workers Union, did come to a deal. John Deere workers are still on strike. Kellogg workers are still on strike. There are still lots of workers who are standing up for their rights. So make sure to support those unions and organizations who are supporting them. The Alabama coal miners strike has been going on for 7 months, and I know that they could use some cash at this juncture. So make sure to support any strike that's going on where workers are standing up for their power to share in the value of their labor. So that's 40 minutes, guys. I told you I was tired and exhausted from a long week. I yawned during this podcast. So guess what that means? That means we're going to end. So this is Cameron Cowan. This is the Cameron Journal Podcast. Thank you so much for watching me on live. Thank you so much for listening to the audio version. I appreciate you. I love y'all, and I will see you next week. Have a good night. Bye-bye.